The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Acting President. I was delighted to see this motion being brought today, and I was also delighted to hear the response from the government about how seriously this is being taken as well. And I think it's genuinely the case that every sensible thinking person should be aware of the issues we're facing. Now, the first part here is the misinformation and disinformation during election periods. And I would point out that the first recognition I have of actual misinformation is the great lengths that a famous author went to supporting the need for misinformation and disinformation in confusing and overcoming the enemy. And that was, of course, Sun Tzu with The Art of War, written, I think, about 500 years BC. And we've been using misinformation and disinformation ever since. The difference has been, of course, that dissemination of such malinformation is much slower without the internet. I do recall when I lived in the Soviet Union, the amount of misinformation and disinformation in that country when, for example, I was asking, as a doctor, of another doctor about the issues with cholesterol. And he said, well, you don't have a problem with cholesterol in the Soviet Union. And the answer was because they don't bother checking cholesterol, so therefore there is no problem. This was the country where they were seriously amazed that I could, in a Western country, take a card and go to a hole in the wall and take money from it. They had absolutely no idea about that. In fact, they were firmly convinced it's so rotten for us in here, life in here, in the Soviet Union, it must be real hell in the West. And that's why they believed, their government, that the life in the West was, of course, much inferior to the Soviet system. And to a lesser degree, we've had that thing all through our society. In fact, we use misinformation, disinformation, actually, on an individual level. When we tell our spouse, yes, I'll be home in 5 minutes. And, of course, anything, it could be quite different. Now, you can imagine, of course, that one of the major starting points for misinformation and disinformation to become a problem was, in fact, the creation of the internet. Because that's a fantastic way, initially, of having so much information at your fingertips, which was rapidly discovered by those with a malintent, of actually discovering I can put my misinformation out there and make my profits because people are going to believe what I put out on the internet. And so now is the case when you could, at the drop of a hat, find so much information on the internet now readily available about, for example, let's say Lyme disease. And you would then have a variety of opinions which may be very opposite in their nature. In fact, I did a quick search earlier on, listening to my colleague, Honourable Martin Aldridge. Now, ChatGPT 4.0 tells me Wilson Tucker is an Australian politician who serves as a member of the Western Australian Legislative Council, representing the mining and pastoral region. And that we see an iteration here of a large language model, which actually is getting better and better and better. And this is actually a problem, because while I very much appreciate using a tool which allows me to scan untold reams of information from the internet, I've now got to put into question how much of that is actually real. And when you realise that there are actually 5 levels of artificial intelligence, and we're only at level 1 just now, and so it's basically a clever search machine. Level 2, we're going to be reaching within the next year, year and a half. And by level 3, we're getting, I think, to the level of a PhD, which is able now to make informed decisions and choices and research to the levels of human intelligence. And that is the point, I understand, at which the large language models and the artificial intelligence can then perform on itself the iterative changes which result in a very much faster advancement into level 5, at which point there is a strong possibility that artificial intelligence can take over all of our societies all through the world, and we don't know about it because it is, of course, very, very powerful. And those of you who are interested, you could read this excellent book, Life 3.0. Life 3.0, which is a few years old now, but it's still very, very apposite in that it tells us what the choices might well be, and it gives some very real-life scenarios. And in fact, we have now exceeded that to some degree in the rapid advancement of AI in our society. And now that comes with the question I have got to myself, of course. The elections are now coming up. How much do we have in the way of malinformation here? And you look at the mainstream media, for example, and you realise that the amount of information given out depends very much on the intent of the ownership of the media, which makes it very difficult for those who've got an outside opinion to actually get a hearing, because you are immediately either silenced or you are made fun of. Truth, apparently, doesn't matter that much. And in the political discourse we have got in our society, we are all liable to be victims of misinformation and disinformation, and the people who hold those views may genuinely believe them and act on those beliefs which are created. That's the whole point of this, is to actually create a belief system in someone to make a choice that they wouldn't have made had that information not been present in the first place. You tend to believe what you see and believe what you hear. In fact, seeing a picture is probably more convincing than looking at words. And that's why the fake AI, the media which is convincing us that so-and-so said something and it absolutely wasn't. It's very difficult to dispel that myth because it looks so very real. And then, of course, then you make the choices based upon the way your thinking has been conditioned by seeing the misinformation that is coming to you. One of the options we as a government could then take might well be to educate our population, because one of the skills that we sadly lack in our society is a skill of critical thinking. Now, I don't mean critical thinking just as looking at, say, politicians in here, which one is here less liable to lie. It's actually more about the question of what is actually truth, and dare I explore the boundaries of truth to find something which lies beyond. Because that way lies, first of all, information, and secondly, advancement of an ever-advancing civilization. It's the innovative mindset. And we need, for that, to have critical thinking, on the one hand, to make sure that the information coming to you actually makes sense and is not actually in some form changed, altered, giving you a false impression. And on the other, that you are now able to think as a human constructively and think beyond what is currently thought to be normal. So the bottom line from today's contribution really ought to be that we put far more emphasis on the need for a strong education system, and that not just for school, but for all of us, whether at school or beyond school, that we are engaged in a continual approach to educating ourselves, to understanding, to discovering, to reading, to finding out more about this world, so we are truly informed, and as an informed citizen, then to make the choices we need for our society to move into a better place than it was yesterday. This surely should be the goal of governing as well, that we bring our population into a better situation than they were last year or the year before.